The Five Rings Podcast with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee on the Sport Podcasting Network. Follow us and listen to us live on Twitter at Five Rings Podcast and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network for more content.
And good day, good night. Welcome to the Five Rings Podcast. I'm Kev Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, the opening ceremony is over. The games are upon us. The cauldron is lit, and the games are open.
They are indeed. About 7.5 hours to go until we get some live events again. And I already watched quite a bit of it already. It felt weird because I don't ever remember, Kevin. I know that there's always a little bit before, you know, the football, soccer usually starts a little early.
Yeah,
sometimes
maybe baseball, like team sports usually.
Yeah, but to have like a full day of rowing in there and 2 days of team competition, it feels like this is kind of in the middle of it. Although, you know, that looking at the schedule for tomorrow and it's wow.
Yeah, there's a lot, and we'll get to the schedule later today. We'll finish the show by looking at what's going to happen later tonight in the Eastern Time Zone. Of course, tomorrow in Japan Day, and day number 1. Today is still day 0, I guess, or day number O, as in opening ceremony. And of course, Duane, we'll talk about the opening ceremony, and later in the show, we'll do our wood, poutine, bronze, silver, and gold medal of the day, because like Duane mentioned, there's been a lot of competition so far. And you know what? I think it's time we just extend the Olympics by a few days and be like, you know what? Let's not be wishy-washy. Let's actually be pedantic. We'll start with the opening ceremony, and I'm okay having even a day rest in between and then the competitions, because whenever it'll be possible to see all the athletes back into a stadium, that spectacle, that mass of humanity coming out of a tunnel all dressed together, I miss that image. And of course, today was just to wet my whistle, we could say.
Yeah, look, I usually very much enjoy the opening ceremonies, and it's because of the excitement and the anticipation and the pop that you get from them. Like, there's a buzz in the air, right? And you can really feel the sense of the occasion even through your television. But it was a little missing today, and that's no fault of the organizers. That's no fault of people of Tokyo, obviously, or anyone involved in the production of that ceremony, which was perfectly fine, just as all of them are. It just lacked that element, right? Like, you just didn't get the pop. When the Japanese team came into the stadium, there wasn't the huge roar. Like, I still remember, I was thinking of this when I was watching it. I remember watching the 2000 ceremonies in Australia, obviously, Sydney. And when the Australian team came in, I'd never heard a roar like that, and it really set the tone for the whole games. If you remember that was the Aussie, oi, oi, oi games, and you could just really see the energy of the Australian people and how excited and proud they were. And you would have got that in Japan too, and it's just sad to not have it. And everything I was watching, I was sort of thinking in the back of my mind, it's too bad that there's no fans in there. And they also made a conscientious choice to make it a more subdued.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Subdued ceremony.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not as joyful or festive, and a bit more realistic. And I did like a few touches, and we'll get to it. Might as well talk about the opening ceremony now, Duane. I did like the aspect of hearing the commentators here in Canada on CBC Sports acknowledge a few things that weren't acknowledged in the past. And of course, it wasn't perfect, and they didn't acknowledge certain things for certain country. Like when Cuba came out, there was no mention of the political climate right now in Cuba over the last few weeks, and I thought was unfortunate. But when you look in a situation where we saw them mention, like Kyrgyzstan, that the guy was just a one man, and there was no sharing of the gender for the flag waving, which was possible this year to have two flag bearers of different gender to represent unity and equality, at least to begin with, and they didn't do that. There was a couple countries that didn't do that, and it was like Yemen, of course, and those countries stood out, unfortunately. I like the fact that they did point that out, and they did point out, too, that some countries had difficult few years and difficulty with handling the virus and then coming into these games without the same level of vaccination. I kind of enjoyed the realistic aspect of these opening ceremonies.
Yeah, CBC, I got to give them credit. They were very much on top of not sugarcoating things. Like when they walked it, when the countries that walked out without having the female flag bearer, and let's be frank, it was always the female that was missing from the pairing, not the male, right? It was pointed out, and that's refreshing, because sometimes the partners in Olympics avoid, they're told to avoid certain things, and they wouldn't in this particular case, and that's good. They mentioned the protests outside the stadium, which we'll talk more about in a minute, throughout the broadcast, and generally, say what you want about the CBC here in Canada, and I won't make this too long at this point because it's not a Canadian only show, but they know how to do an Olympics. They've been doing them for years. So, and I'm sure that was the same for BBC or any of that. And hopefully that they also were addressing these concerns.
Yeah, and we were glad to see these concerns being addressed. Now, the opening ceremonies, we saw Naomi Osaka light the cauldron. You just saw the cauldron on your screen. A good-looking cauldron. No mishaps. That's always great. No fourth arm of the damn freaking cauldron not opening up. Not 20 minutes of Wayne Gretzky in the back of a pickup truck. Always enjoy that aspect. Not seeing an old Wayne Gretzky in the back of a pickup truck, making sure he doesn't fall with fire in his hands. That was great to see today.
The rain pouring.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Or the rain pouring, or like someone missing, or like a fire barely being lit, This flame, well, talk about a flame. It's hydrogen powered, and it is powerful indeed. This reminds me of when I used to be a smoker, those butane lighters. That's the type of lighter, and you know what? That flame ain't going out anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm gonna let people in a little secret. The torch doesn't really light it. There's a switch.
And there's someone in the background pressing something, like, okay, 3, 2, 1, here you go.
Yeah, if you go back to watch the Barcelona lighting, which of course was the Archer, doesn't hit it.
There's a camera angle. I don't know if we can find it on YouTube. Maybe if you can, there's someone behind it. Just you see the arrow just missing like 10 feet in the air, but it's fine. The illusion, the magic, and the beauty of television.
Yeah, look, I am a traditionalist when it comes to who lights it. I understand their choice today. I think there's a lot of symbolism to a mixed race Japanese athlete lighting it. I think that there's something to that, and she also is a very strong-willed, in her own way, athlete. So I understand the choice. I
also, sorry, Duane, I was going to say also she's really open right now with her mental illness and really open with how she's dealing with it. It's a very public situation, and that also takes some of the stigma not away, but it's, I guess, a step in that direction.
Yeah, so I do understand their choice, but I will say that I am a traditionalist. I prefer when it's a former athlete, but I think that there's like the Muhammad Ali and Atlanta didn't do a lot right. Let's be blunt. It was the commercial game, but the one thing they did do very well was the choice of Muhammad Ali and that moment when he came up and with the Parkinson's, and it was just a very great moment. And I think it's nice to have that when you have a former athlete. It's why when I think back to Vancouver, I still get irritated that they put Wayne Gretzky in the back of a damn pickup truck and drove him from downtown Vancouver when they could have just had him light the cauldron.
Yep, exactly. And let's not forget Jacques Villeneuve was there. That was also like, sure, why not? Someone that never had anything to do with the Olympic movement, but hey, he's the only F1 world champion this country has ever seen. So let's put Jacques Villeneuve in here.
There you go. They could have had him drive the car. That would have been more fitting.
Well, him driving the pickup truck with Wayne Gretzky barely hanging on in the back and burning the heck out of everything, that would have been spectacular.
Yeah, but anyway, no, it's lit, and that's the important thing. And there's a bit of a pop there, and I do enjoy some of the rhythm of watching the games and having it on. And I kind of like too. I mean, I know it's the same amount of time between when the games start, but it feels longer when you have to sleep in between it. So now that I've, today, I'm going to see more sports. That's what makes me happy, because as much as I enjoy an opening ceremony, again, it's about the anticipation and the buzz and all that. What I want to watch are the sports.
Speaking of buzz and anticipation, let's be a buzzkill and start our medal countdown with our wood medal of the day. Here we go, and that is, of course, the protest outside. No, we're not blaming the protests themselves. We're not giving the wood medal to the protesters. Everyone is allowed to protest against things that they don't agree with. How it was handled by the IOC, how this thing and the suppression of the movement over the last few months, that is more what we want to talk about. Of course, there's a surge of COVID-19. There's a very high level of restrictions, and it's not viewed and they're not necessarily welcome as much by the population as you would have expected in a normal time, these games. And there were some protests held outside the stadium during the opening ceremony. At some silent part, you could even hear them. What can you tell us about the reasoning behind the protests? What do they mean, and what is the feeling on the ground level in Tokyo?
Yeah, I mean, there's the public is strongly against the holding of the games at this point, and that is something that we have to deal with. We have to emotionally deal with it as lovers of the games and lovers of the sport. We understand that the people that in these communities that host these games, they first off, they choose to do it. So there is that. There is a contract involved, but no one could have predicted this. I just think that the way the IOC handled it in totality was poor, and that goes right back to the cancel or the postponement last year, because that dragged, and they did eventually make a decision pretty quickly, but it ultimately could have been made a month before they did.
It took countries pulling out for them to realize that they needed to do that. I don't know if you watched that documentary on CBC yesterday. By the way, if we're referencing the things on CBC and you're outside of Canada, there's ways you can actually watch it, and legal ways too. But we're fortunate in having a public broadcasters with our tax money. They're doing a really good job covering the Olympics and doing documentaries. And there was a documentary on Ali Black and the entire artistic gymnastic team and the postponement and the aspect. I even forgot, Duane, until last night that they declared that Canada wouldn't send athletes first, and then the game got canceled. And it took countries like Canada, Australia, and others to put the pressure on the organizing committee and the IOC to actually take that decision last year.
Yeah, Canada was the first country to pull out, and Australia was about 20 minutes after that. And at that point, you have two two countries that have hosted. Canada's hosted 3 games, and Australia is about to host a 3rd game in a few years. So yeah, those are 2 big players in the Olympic movement, and for them to pull out, that caused the movement. There's if you go back in our archives, you can listen to an interview with Evan Dunphy, the race walker, 50K bronze medalist in the Worlds. You can listen to him react to that and how he said how proud he was of being a Canadian athlete at that moment, because we took that leadership in the world to make that happen. At any rate, to get it back to the current case now, I felt about 6, 7, 8 months ago, there was a way that you could have spread the burden or the responsibility of these games out among several countries, because let's face it, it's not a spectator event anymore. It's a made-for-TV event.
So it doesn't matter. So you can dress it up as much as you want. You could be in Barcelona, Spain, and you can write Tokyo 2020 on the walls, and no one would be the wiser.
Yeah, I was just Olympiad 2020, and combined with that, you could have then either refunded Tokyo some money, which I know the IOC would be reluctant to do, or you could have given them 32, and then worked ahead from that. It's not like they have a huge bidding issue right now. They could have just told Brisbane that they're going to bump them to 36 and give Tokyo 32 to make up for not having this, so they could have a proper game.
And that is actually a question that I have, and I was asking myself this question earlier today. Do we owe Japan an Olympic Games? Do we owe Japan not only to give them the games again, but to maybe pay for it a little bit? The rest of the IOC movement as a whole, maybe be like, you know what? Let's all chip in 20 or 10 or maybe $1 billion each, and let's alleviate that burden, because we owe it to Japan.
Yeah, it's estimated. I wrote about this last week for my 9-to-5 job. It's estimated that they will lose $800 million US dollars. And I always convert to USD, but 800 million. That's a lot of money, and that's an estimate. And those things are generally low, right? They generally try to, it's just like when your significant other calls you when you're running late because you got distracted with your friends down at the pub, and you always tell them you'll be home in 20 minutes.
I'll be home in 20 minutes. It means I'm going to start to leave maybe in 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's the same with a monetary thing. 800 million probably means 1.5 billion, right?
Yeah, I'll be there at 2. I'm going to leave where I am around 2:15. So you do the count.
Yeah, exactly. So we understand that. Not to make light, but it's unfortunate, and I feel for them a lot. Again, we're in very recent memory of Vancouver. I mean, it's a decade ago now, which blows my mind. But how this country felt, even where I was, I didn't get out to any games in Vancouver. I just couldn't afford it at that time in my life. But even here in Toronto, it was a buzz in the city for those 2 weeks. I've told the story before about like watching one of the hockey games at a bar, and there immediately the game cuts out, and they were not cuts out, it finished, and then they cut to like bobsled, and the entire bar packed full of drunk hockey fans were screaming because of Canadian bobsled gold medal. Anyway,
Skelton, like we've all fell in love with Skelton on that night because we were all getting drunk, and I remember living in Oakville that day, and all going to Zellers back in the day because it was more than just the Bay. It was Zellers and the Bay. God, I'm mad at you, Target, still for stealing our big chain magazine, but big chain store. But you know what? I went to Zellers and there was 20,000 people. Maybe it's a rough estimate that were trying to get the merchandise of the Canada jersey and looks. Yeah, that was a big buzz back then.
Yeah, and that was just like. There were whole essays written on this of how like it was a time when Canadians sort of got their tail up for once and were like not apologizing, right? Like, and there's problems with nationalism, but there's no problems with patriotism. And if you know the distinction between those two words,
there's a big distinction, and usually it goes with openness and mindfulness and kindness. The big difference between the two.
So, and it was just a wonderful time to be part, to just stand up and be noticed. And then, the last 5 days of those games for Canada was insane. Like, there was gold after gold, and it was just a great moment. And Japan won't get that. And I wonder how much of a bump their athletes are going to get. And, they might even feel burdened more than normal, and they might even have a reduced bill. I'm sure they've invested in their athletes, so they'll be more prepared athletically, so they'll do well. But I wonder whether they'll do as well.
And there's over 580 athletes representing Japan in these games. I think they're the second biggest delegation, only behind the United States, if I'm not mistaken. Give or take a few, but the United States is like 634. So there's a lot of athletes for Japan, a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, but they do, because the host country gets a team in the team sports. So that helps bump those numbers a bit. But
and one person qualified in every single event. So regardless if you achieve the standards. So
yeah, exactly. So anyway, but it's, we'll see what they do. And the last thought on this, because we can talk all day on this, but I will wonder, because of the differences in rollouts for vaccines around the world, whether you might see a far greater concentration of medals, even more than usual, amongst the top 5 or 6 countries. The countries that have had a better health reaction to this, that have the resources to allow their athletes to continue to train. And that's an unfortunate sort of side effect of this. Athletes are very determined people, but you are limited by your infrastructures. And if you don't have the infrastructures to allow yourself to train in the best of conditions, you're certainly not going to have them in the last year. So I do think that the COVID-19 is going to impact these games significantly, unfortunately, but at least, you still get your experience of being there. And for what I saw in the faces of the athletes, you saw the Portugal team come in waving that flag madly.
France coming out really happy, having a choreography and a choreographer leading the way. Why not? Why not make an impression?
Exactly. Our friend from Tonga, although he's from California, he just has Tongan heritage.
And he wasn't the only one this time around. Pretty much anyone that has a Polynesian or I would say South Pacific vibe to it, from Vanuatu to a couple others, pulled out all the stops and came out guns blazing, if you know what I mean.
That guy has a life, that Tongan. So he's world famous for what he does, and what he's famous for is oiling up his abs.
Oiling up is not even that chiseled body. Let's face it. There's a lot of athletes in there that has a way more chiseled body in there. Like, put any men gymnast without a shirt and put some oil on him, and they're way more popular than that Tonga guy. But yes, you're right.
Yeah, well, and he goes to the winter and the summer games. He doesn't have any pressure to actually do anything. His job is done now.
His claim to fame is to take his shirt off, and then, heck, I don't even need to finish my competition. I just got to be the best of. I just got to achieve the bare minimum to qualify from there. Because I'm from a country that is not as good, I get a bit of a break to qualify. So sure, but that's par for the course now. I guess it's part of the show. It's he's part of the pageantry of the Olympics.
Sorry, I'm just suddenly reminded of the bare minimum, the snowboarder that just went up and down the pipe without doing any tricks, because that was all she needed to qualify.
Like, if I do any trick, I'm gonna break my neck. I'm not gonna do that. He was me in every single. I still think we should have one random person of each country representing their country, just to be like. He's the regular person standard. Be like, you know what? Just to show you how good these people are. Here's Joe from North Dakota, who's going to show you how far he can jump.
Well, yeah, fair enough. I even when I was I ran track when I was in high school, and my PB for the long jump was just over 5 meters, which if you measure 5 meters out,
that's far. That's really big.
That I jumped that far when I was young.
Damn.
But it's nowhere near what they're jumping.
Yeah, the record is 17, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. It's crazy.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. All right, let's take a look at our Poutine Medal for the day -1, I guess. And we're talking about Rowing Canada here. 3 boats qualified for the next round after an abysmal Rio 2016. Rowing Canada, after a lot of investment, introspection, and, of course, I guess, reshuffling of their front offices, we're seeing some results on the magnificent Sea Forest Waterway, which we'll be talking about after the break. But Carling Zeeman is one of the athlete that did qualify the boat for the next round. Canada having a good evening our time last night in rowing in the preliminary round.
Yeah, and this is really a reflection of, like you said, a rethink. If you go back and listen to our Rio shows, you will have heard us talk a lot about the disappointment of the rowing performance. It was a slow start to the Olympics for Canada medals-wise, and a big part of that was because the rowers were not performing to their expectation. Here in Canada, we have a system called On the Podium, which is a different name for the Summer Games, but it's the same idea, where they reward past success. So Rowing Canada having the games that they did where they only had the 1 medal was an incredible disappointment, and not just on an emotional level, on a financial level for them for the next 4 years. So they have streamlined things. They've gone a little younger. They've gone back to trying to go to areas of strength in the past. They tried to change things up. Like they tried to reinvent the wheel basically in the lead of Rio. They thought they could game the system to win more medals.
Yeah. And now they're like realizing that, we need more experience, and experience on the water means something, which I love the RBC training ground and the whole aspect of this program and everything, but you also got to give points to people that have experience on the actual sports and not just people that do well in testing.
Yeah, that's more of an identification program, I think. But yeah, that's, for instance, we still don't have a men's 8 in this regatta, which is disappointing because it is the big event. The women's 8 as well. So we do have a women's boat, and it is a medal contender. That was a choice to eliminate the men's 8, which was an incredibly successful program that they'd run for years, to try and split it into 2 4s. And the thinking was that they'd get 2 medals instead of 1, and they got none, right? And that was kind of like the backwards way that they went about things heading into Rio. So the rethink has led to a few junior world championships. By all accounts, from talking to people over the last little while, there's 2-3 medal chances in this, and probably 4 or 5 boats could get to the final, and that would be after Rio a start. And I think that the real thinking is that by the time they hit Paris in 3 years' time, not 4, that it will be ready to really compete and maybe try and get back up to the glory days of the Atlanta Games, where it was they won 2 gold medals in 20 minutes at one point in that game. So that's where they want to get back to, and I think that that's a good step forward. And rowing, whenever I see rowing on there, it's always, for me, because I'm Canadian and they've always focused a lot on the rowing. Mm-hmm. That when you see those rowers on your TV, that's when the Olympics have started. So it was nice to see some success and some easy qualifications to the second round today, the quarterfinals.
It's also your English heritage, I guess, has something to do with rowing and Liger rowing. Of course, it's a big sport that has its history.
You'll note the Commonwealth countries are really good at it. Yes, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Great Britain. Yeah.
It takes also amazing infrastructure. And we'll talk about the infrastructure for rowing after a short break, because after the break, we're going to give our bronze, our silver, and our gold medal for day number 0, I guess, of the 2020 Olympic Games happening in 2021. We'll be right back after this short break. You are listening to the Five Rings Podcast, daily coverage of Tokyo 2020 with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Follow us on Twitter at Five Rings Podcast. You can find podcast version of this show at sportspodcastingnetwork.com. You can support us financially at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/sports podcasting network. Give us a like, give us a subscription, hit that notification bell, and enjoy this video podcast on your favorite YouTube channel. But as always, back to the show. And we're back on the Five Rings Podcast. Kevin Laramee with Duane Rollins, as always, talking about Day Zero and the opening ceremony. We talked about rowing before the break, and Duane, that's a good segue into our bronze medal today. Because our bronze medal talks about one of our favorite benefit of Olympic Games. What we call hard benefit? Yeah, benefit like are tangible. Benefit that are made of concrete. Hard benefit of these Olympic Games. We're talking about wasteland. Something that is not necessarily useful for the next generation and turning into something beautiful for everyone to enjoy. Here's what the sea forest waterway looks like, Duane, from being a place to put waste to being a place to waste energy, meaning of sweat on your boat. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, for sure. It's converted dump. That's to use a less colorful or more colorful language. And anytime you can take land that's not being useful for the public and you can turn it into something that can be useful from a nature enjoyment perspective, from a place for nature to live off of, birds, etc., and for people to walk along or to ride on a boat to get exercise and benefit the community moving forward, and obviously to benefit world-class athletes to train in as well. That's just a win-win for everyone. As you say, it speaks to what we call hard benefits. There are hard benefits and soft benefits to an Olympics. You have to balance them, right? The soft benefits are the patriotism and the stuff that Tokyo really can't get in these games. And those are sad that they can't get that, and it makes it hard to justify a lot of things. So you have to really focus on the hard benefits. And here's one. And I guarantee you that, probably in this games, the Japanese rowers will not particularly thrive because it's not a rowing country per se. But give it 6-8 years with the facility here, you'll see some medals, I bet.
Well, because this is now the only international class that are respecting the IOC standard rowing complex in the entirety of the Japan Prefecture and all the islands. This is the only international class place for rowers to develop in an area that is the right length to do all the rowing competitions. Has to be long, because it has to be over like a kilometer long. It's a long place. It's a long races when it's 7 minutes straight of rowing, right? It's a long complex, and that's one of the difficulties of that sport is the amount of money involved in creating these infrastructures. But they're going to last for a long time. And the way it is built, yes, it's by the sea, but it is, of course, built in a way that you have 2 6-meter walls on each side that actually create a depth of 6 meters for the entirety of that complex. So you can see on your screen right now where there's 2 bridges. So after one bridge, it's the sea, and the other bridge, too, is the sea. And then you see that wall, and you see the calm water, which is the whole point of these 2 walls, too. It keeps the water calm for these competition. It is of course, you don't control the weather, you don't control the wind, so the wind can create waves, but it is a controlled, at least partially controlled rowing environment, and that's great for the future rowers of Japan and the surrounding countries, because you will have a lot of smaller countries that do not have these infrastructure traveling to Tokyo to use them.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, look, I live in a city which is located on top of one of the 10th biggest lake in the world or something, and they have a crash wall all along the shore. I can walk at any time and see the Argonaut Rowing Club training there all the time, of which there are Olympians, and so that's an advantage that this country has, and one of the reasons why they produce rowers that win medals.
And there's a city that hosted the Summer Olympics here in Canada. Oh wait, I'm literally in it right now, and behind me you could see literally the beginning of the Bassin Olympique on my background here. It's still used to this day, maybe not to the level that it should or that it used to, but it's there and it's still useful. That's a hard benefit, but we do love the fact that they transferred a wasteland into the rowing competition. And on that note, Duane, let's talk about our silver medal for day number 0. And that is, of course, softball. We've talked about art benefit. Let's talk about soft things. Softball. Play ball.
I am so happy that the bat and ball sports are back into these games. It was a mistake to take them out. There's no guarantee they're going to be in the next ones.
They won't. It's temporary, but you know what? Let's enjoy them while they're here.
Yeah, it's the IOC of all of its faults. This is one of their lesser ones, but it is a fault. They're very Eurocentric. So when they chose to to reduce the games, they decided to take a sport out in the bat ball sports. So they have softball for the women and baseball for the men. There's another conversation we could have. Pick one and go with it. I think softball should be the one that stays in, to be honest, because baseball, difficult to get the very top athletes there because of MLB going on at the same time, but softball would not have that issue. So
having softball, the Olympics would also create more interest in men's softball, and then it would become, you're right, the pinnacle of that sport, which is what you want for the Olympics.
Yeah. In softball, diamonds are a little smaller. They require less footprint, so they'd be a little easier on certain parts of the world to produce than a baseball diamond. But at any rate, it's massively popular in Latin America and obviously North America and parts of Asia, Japan being prime among them, which is why it's back. So it's good to see it there. I'm happy for these athletes to have gotten probably what I'm going to surprise for some of them that were, if they're in their 30s now, you probably thought that you were never going to have a chance again, and then maybe you got back in and might have kept you in the sport for a few years. So I hope this they enjoyed their time out there, and so far so good. It's been pretty good. I watched 3 or 4 softball games, and they go fast too. A softball game is quicker. It's 7 innings, and it has a rhythm that's a little quicker than a baseball game. So it's kind of more enjoyable. When I was at the Pan Ams in 2015, I was surprised by this because I just was buying tickets for anything because they were in my own city. And softball was one on the final weekend that I couldn't get anything on the final weekend because the games kept getting more and more popular for tickets throughout. And I just kept trying and eventually just randomly got the softball bronze medal game. And it was a blast to be out there. It's really exciting to watch live. So I'm excited to watch more of it. I'm Canada, Australia tonight. I'll be watching that one for sure, but it's good to see it there.
Yeah, there's a few games that actually happened already in the opening round, as you can see on your screens. Australia, Italy, Japan, Mexico. Canada beat Mexico 4-0 too. That was a good result. The U.S. and Canada did play earlier on too. But when you're talking about Australia, Canada at 9 p.m. Eastern time tonight. U.S. Mexico 1:30 a.m. tonight. Those are a great matchup, and it's going to be part of our day 1 schedule because tonight it's on. Just like Donkey Kong, it's for real.
Exactly. We'll talk about the schedule at the end, but the Americans, of course, are the heavy favorites in this. They beat Canada 1-0 or 1-0. It's not soccer, Duane. They beat them 1-0, and it was a dominant pitching performance. Only 1 hit for the Canadians in that one, and that's what America's strength is. They just have this ability to produce softball pitchers that just do remarkable things with the ball. They can move. There's like they have a pitch in softball that ball appears to go up, which just blows my mind, and it's it's quite a remarkable thing to see. And as I said, when I saw it at the Pan Ams, when you see it live, you get context on how fast it is coming in there. It's really remarkable, and I'm happy to see it back.
It's going to be quite a fun tournament. And of course, I like these tournaments at the Olympics. I like when it's not just 10 seconds and the entire event is over, which is always, to me, sad because I'm like, I get excited. I like long things, I guess. Like I love marathon competitions like Euro, World Cup, even the Olympics. To me, they never last long enough. I'm like, I'll take even more of it if I can. To me, that's what I really want. But it's that point of the day where it's time to look at shinier things in life, to look at things that are a little more golden, a little bit more shiny, and a little bit more gold. Yeah, let's talk about our gold medal of today. The games of the 32nd Olympiad are open, the cauldron is lit, and our schedule is full.
Yeah, look, there's only one gold medal on this day, and that's the fact that they got these damn things to off. We talked about the problems, we talked about the concerns, and not to dismiss them or ever forget them, but the reality is I am pretty convinced that these games will go off safely and that they will get these athletes their opportunity to have their Olympic moments and to compete for their Olympic medals, which I think is very important. And I do also believe that there are a lot of armchair critics out there that are only concerned about the COVID aspect of things, that kind of lose sight of the emotional impact that losing an Olympics for a world-class athlete would have been. They want to compete. They've trained their whole life for it, right? To take that away from them, and so why, when people start talking about boycotts, I get angry about it. I'm not just against it. I get angry about it. It's not fair to the athletes to use them as pawns. But in this case, I think that there is a way to do these things safely. We've saw the Euros take place without any spikes in COVID, and that was with fans in the stands. I don't have any worry that there's going to be COVID cases in here. I have empathy for the Japanese people, for the financial burden it's going to place on them, and the fact that they, are hosting a party that they can't go to. All of that is terrible. But I think these games can go off, and I think that the work that has gone into it, the volunteers that are there, the organizers in Japan, the Olympic committees around the world for their athletes ready deserve a lot of credit. And there's a lot of hard work that gets done at the grassroots to make sure these things happen. We focus a lot on the big high-end stuff. That's give thanks to the people, local communities, to the people that run training grants, to the people that have worked to accommodate athletes for training over the last year to make sure that these things happen, that we get our 2-week event, that we can watch Taekwondo at 3 a.m. I thank you for that, because it's a great joy of my life, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it.
Yeah, I agree, Duane, and which leads us to what do we want to watch tonight? Because it is on. The schedule is on. And there's real competition starting tonight. Of course, in Tokyo term, it's Saturday, right? Tomorrow, Saturday, day 1. Tonight, it's, of course, for Friday night for us in the Eastern time zone. That's where we're located. I'm in Montreal. Duane's in Toronto. If you're watching us by video, you know that by now. But Duane, we're having some swimming tonight. There's medleys, and there's going to be some men's international individual medley and stuff. Water polo. We're going to see a gold medal being given between tonight and tomorrow morning in archery. Badminton starts, softball, 3-on-3 basketball. We haven't talked about basketball, 3-on-3 basketball, and the U.S. hasn't even qualified for that basketball competition of 3 versus 3. And that starts also today. Boxing starts today. The cycling road race starts at 10 p.m. tonight. We're going to know who's going to wear a gold helmet for the next 4 years in the International Cycling Peloton.
And I figured that that's where most of your attention will go to tonight, Kevin. If you're new to us, Kevin's the cycling guy in this show, and I am very curious to see how speaking of those hard benefits there, I'm curious to see whether the 2015 effect is going to start to help the Canadian track team here soon. But we'll talk about that.
But we'll talk about that, of course, in the second week of the Olympic. That's where track cycling will start. There's some equestrian competition tonight. Fencing. We're going to have 2 gold medals being given out tonight in the competition of fencing. Field hockey, soccer continues. Artistic gymnastics starts today. Yes, the men starts tonight on the individual apparatus and the qualification aspect and the preliminary round, and we will know who represents Canada in all these competitions tonight. There's also handball, judo, rowing, shooting. There's table tennis, taekwondo. We'll get some gold medals heading out in taekwondo on day number 1. There's, of course, tennis, beach volleyball, some volleyball, and weightlifting. We'll have some medals handed out in weightlifting. Also, day 1. Who says it's too early on day 1 to already have medals being handed over?
Yep. Traditionally, it's the archery team event. It's the first one to go, and I believe that is the first medal of the games. That'll happen
tonight.
12 hours. Yeah. So I'm really looking beach volleyball is always one of my favorites. So that starts tonight, and it will run throughout. I loved it at Rio because Rio, obviously, the beach volleyball was a huge part of that, and that's my biggest memory of the Rio Games. Is I always would end my night watching about an hour of beach volleyball, and it was so vibrant and festival like in the stadiums there. And of course, it won't happen here, but it's a fun sport to watch. And again, to go back to 2015, I bought random tickets for everything, but I bought like beach volleyball 3 times. So yeah,
I remember the facilities right next to BMO Field. It was a fun place to be, and it was a party that was good to attend, and cheap party too.
Yeah, and if anyone from Toronto is listening, you could always reset that venue up and host them again. We could have more world championships here and stuff, Anyway, that's just another topic for another day. But
at least they've used the Milton Velodrome, and I'll give my slow clap to Canada for not destroying the second world-class velodrome facility we had in this country. Because you already destroyed one in putting animals. Because back then, zoos were cool. They're not. Put a velodrome back in the velodrome in Montreal.
Isn't it just trees? I think
no,
it's
there's animals. It's a biodome, but it's animals. It's 4 different habitats and animals of their own habitats living in there. So there's penguins and stuff. So yeah.
Is it reopened?
I think it has, but I'm not sure because it was delayed for like 10,000 years for renovations.
Well, that's
you know what? When you build a biodome in a place that's supposed to hold competitions, well, mold grows in the wall because it's not supposed to be 32 degrees in there. So there you go.
Yeah, no, I went to before the pandemic. I was in Montreal about twice a year, pretty consistently, and I remember seemed to be it was 10 years that they were renovating that thing. Anyway,
since 2018, and it was supposed to reopen in 2019, but something called the pandemic that was a little monkey in the wrench. But for today, it's going to be all of the 5 Rings podcast. You can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute and myself at Kev Laramee, and this show at 5 Rings Podcast. We'll be back tomorrow morning after the day's competition or almost wrapping up. We'll give you our coverage of the day around a little bit past 9 a.m. tomorrow. But as always, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kev Laramee. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast everywhere you find your favorite shows. Go on YouTube, take a second, subscribe to our YouTube page, give us a like to this Olympic show. We're the longest running Olympic podcast on the planet, and a like really helps the algorithm of YouTube to discover that we actually exist. Our numbers are laughable. Help us change that. But as always, until next time, have a great Olympiad.